Welcome everybody. I appreciate your coming out on this lovely Saturday. And we'll get started.
Yeah, well, again, my pleasure to be here with my friend Wendy. Wendy and I have known each other for several years now. And when I learned that she wrote a book, with all the things that I already knew about her, it didn't surprise me. She's a multi-talented woman and just a wonderful individual and a great friend to have. So Wendy, we're going to start off with asking you, what actually inspired you to write a book about your coffee passion?
So it's an interesting story. I'll read you a couple of sections about how I started loving coffee, but before I moved to the Cape 3 years ago, Starbucks in Needham was basically my office. I just lived there basically. I just love coffee and I love staying there and meeting people, and it was a really good central meeting place to where I lived. I lived in Dover and I had a lot of friends that lived in the Needham area, and it was kind of a good halfway point. But sometimes I would be there by myself, sometimes I'd be there with friends, and I'd always hear interesting conversations. And I just always think, that would be a really interesting story to write about. So it kind of has been in my mind to write, I don't know, just maybe kind of eavesdropping, but you don't really, you hear like really interesting stories. So I was like, someday I should write a book about all my experiences of being in Starbucks. So I had the idea going on and off and on in my head for about 10 years. And then when they were a kid, my kids had been encouraging me to write a book. And now in March, whatever it was, 2020, and everything was closed down. And I was like, you know what, this would be a really good time to delve into writing a book. And there's this man I know, Andy Winnig, who does elevator pitch talks, and you probably have gone to some of his talks from both in the New Chamber of Commerce. So teaching people how to do a 90s and elevator. But so he decided to do one on coffee. One coffee, he said, you know what, we're gonna do a Zoom coffee talk. And I said, so I went to the talk, and afterwards I said to him, you know what, this was like such a great coffee talk, and I've been thinking about writing a book about how people connect over coffee, and now seeing how you're using Zoom as a platform. I really want to write a book about this. Would you be interested in doing it with me? And he was like, that's a fabulous idea. Give me an outline and I would love to work on it with you. So I sat down about a week after I spoke to him, and I just basically wrote my entire book. And it just came out in a flow, and I sent him a draft, and he said to me, welcome.
Excuse me for being late. I'm sorry.
No, welcome. I'm glad you came.
Can you see behind?
So I'm just talking about how I got started with writing. So I sent him a draft of my book, and he said to me, this is fabulous, but it doesn't really have any, it had like a bunch of stories about how I began liking coffee, and then different stories of my experiences, but he said it doesn't really have any arc, and you really want to make it so that people, you want to build arcs in the story, because that's how you get people to really want to read the book. Ideas. And he said, one thing I noticed in your book is that you mention your husband, but you don't really mention any of the experiences having coffee with your husband. And I said, oh, honestly, it's because he doesn't like coffee. He hates coffee. And he's like, that's your angle. You want to write it as an explanation to your husband about why you like coffee, to explain it to him. So I took his feedback and I went back and I rewrote a new version. A month later, it was around July 4th, he said to me, this is fabulous, it's ready to publish. Like, this is like so good, you don't even write anything, like this is really good and it's ready to launch. I'm gonna connect you with my publisher. And I said, well, will you write the book? He said I'd be really honored to. The initial. So now I'll read you the preface. That was a long-winded answer. What was is an owl that is recording us on Zoom. Did you hear So I want to say this book was dedicated to the eternal memories of my parents, Reverend Audrey Stearns. I also share reflections of other relatives throughout this book, and look forward to creating new memories each and every day to be shared with future generations. I love coffee. In fact, I've often been accused of loving coffee more than my husband. Coffee is my lifeline, and there are times when I can't function without a caffeine infusion. That being said, coffee runs through my veins and it's a part of me. I concur with the National Coffee Association statement about coffee. We believe that coffee is more than just a drink. It's a culture, an economy, an art, a science, and the passion. Whether you're new to the brew or an espresso expert, there's always more to learn with this beloved beverage. In this book, I will share how coffee has connected me to life beyond the cup. Well, I am going to read you. I took Auntie's advice and decided to write this initially as a love letter to my husband. Since publishing the book, I've gone divorced, so just want to keep that in mind as you hear this. Dear Bruce, when we were married, I vowed to honor and obey you through sickness and in health. I now have to confess that I have had a long-term relationship that started before we met and continues to this day. I think it is time to share this with you. My other relationship began several years before we met, has lasted ever since. There is not a day that goes by when I don't lust for it. The desire is a constant in my soul. It gives me energy and focus. Without it, I cannot function. This ardor of love is my affinity for coffee. It has become an integral part of my daily routine. I look forward to a morning cup as soon as I crawl out of bed. Before I start telling the story, I want to preface by saying that I realize you are not a coffee drinker. For me, there is a purpose behind every cup I drink. There is a key differential between us. You drink coffee to stay awake, while I drink coffee to enjoy the experience. At the end of the day, it is often a long anticipated treat. In the following pages, I will elaborate in more detail. I hope that reading this book will help you understand my long affair with coffee. I will start at the beginning with Love, Wendy. I started drinking coffee when I was a preteen, living with my parents in Newton, Massachusetts. Throughout my 40+ years of daily brews, I had gone to college, lived in Connecticut and New York as a single person, moved back to Boston, married my husband Bruce, raised our 3 children, Gregory, Rachel, and Michelle, and adopted a Havanese dog, Delilah. Over this time period, I've been a child, college student, yuppie, wife, parent, caretaker for elderly parents, and now a baby boomer and empty nester. Simultaneously, I've been a renter and homeowner while transitioning between careers. I started in the corporate business world, transitioned to become an independent consultant, and then a professional volunteer during and beyond the kids' school years before moving into my current career as a realtor. The one consistency in my daily routine has been a morning coffee. In this book, I will share some insights and experiences I've had while going through each phase of my life cycle. During the COVID-19 stay-at-home period in particular, I had time to reminisce and travel back through my memory bank. I have tried to go in chronological order as much as possible. However, certain segments of my journey may span a wider gap. I have talked about writing this book for the past 10 years, and I guess one gift of the pandemic has been finally having a time to start. I invite you to grab a cup and share my memory. So if anybody wants pour coffee, I guess there's a machine in there. So, anyway, so that's how I started writing. That was my inspiration to write the book.
Oh, Wendy, that was just lovely. Thank you for sharing the opening of your book with us. Thank you. So you mentioned that your earliest memories were with your family. Can you expand on your earliest memories you have about coffee?
Sure. I'm going to read you a passage, but I just want to say that, so every Saturday growing up in Newton, I used to go out with my mother and my grandmother, and we would just drive down Route 9. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Metro West Boston, but we would go down Route 9 and we would go to Loman's, which was a women's clothing store. We'd go to Hoffman's, which was a discount store. Then we'd stop at Eagleman's Bakery and loop around and go home. But that was like our Saturday since I was a little girl. And then we'd go out for lunch. And I just like remember my mother, my grandmother, and my aunt who occasionally would visit, always enjoyed coffee. And I hated milk as a child. And my mother tried to prompt me to get me to drink milk. So finally, around age 9 or 10, she started giving me coffee in my milk. So I was, and I'll read the section now, but that was like how I kind of started liking coffee. My connection with coffee began at a young age. I was not much of a milk drinker as a child, particularly hated plain milk. My mom always encouraged us to drink more milk because she thought it was important to have calcium in our diet. My dislike for milk began when I drank from a sour-tasting Hood's milk carton during a bus ride to day camp.
Since I refused to drink milk, Mom tried all kinds of strategies to get me to have calcium. I was always weight conscious and believed the old wives' tale that chocolate caused acne. Thus, I avoided Nestle's Quick and Hershey syrup at all costs. As a last resort, she introduced me to coffee when I was about, I guess, age 11, by giving me a glass of half milk. Hello, welcome to sit down, join us, and have coffee. I agreed to drink milk this way and started to acquire a taste for the beverage. Although I didn't love it at first, I drank it regularly to satisfy nutritional guidelines. The more I had, the more I began to like the taste. And gradually I changed the ratios to include more coffee and less milk. I continued to drink it this way until starting college. Of note, my mom had her Maxwell's coffee every morning while she read the newspaper. My younger brother's name is Maxwell, and although he was named after my father's father, I always thought there was an ulterior motive in choosing his name. On a weird side note, during the Jewish holiday of Passover, Maxwell's Coffee offered a free Haggadah with each 1 pound purchase of coffee. And this was the Haggadah of choice of our family. We owned several of these. Growing up, I remember Mom, Grandma Sarah, and Aunt Elaine sitting around the kitchen table, often chatting over coffee. Sometimes my great grandmother, Boogie Pilch, would join them, and although she was a tea drinker, they talked about the kids and the family. They also talked about my aunt's travels, the latest fashions, and books they read. My aunt, who lived in Pennsylvania, was an avid reader. She traveled a lot with my uncle, who was a rabbi, and often would bring me something from the adventures. She would often visit with her 4 sons and occasionally during the year. When possible, she would stop by the Boston area en route to one of her travel destinations. She was a role model for me, and I always look forward to these visits. From her, I developed the quest for travel, the art of shopping, and the love of reading. After a morning round of coffee, we would head out on our shopping adventure. I talked about that already, told you about that. So I'm gonna skip a little bit. In high school, I read the book Coffee, Tea, or Me by Trudy Baker. Did anybody else read that book? The book chronicled the experiences of 2 flight attendants, and although the focus was on passengers being more interested in the me, I became obsessed with coffee. In addition, I was intrigued to become a flight attendant. And after reading the book, I made a $1 bet with my brother, Max, that I would become a flight attendant after college. To this day, I have not fulfilled my end of the bet, and I pray he does not expect royalties from this book. This is just a picture of me with my great grandmother and like multi-generations with my cousins. My great grandmother lived to be 101, got a letter from President Ford at the time. It was kind of cool.
Cool.
Yeah. So that was my earliest days.
Yeah, so obviously your relationship and your perception of coffee's changed over time, depending on what stage of your life you were in at the time. Can you elaborate in your own words a little bit of
Yeah, sure. So when I was
after college or during that time?
So in college, I learned that coffee was a good way to stay awake during studying and exams. And I was weight conscious still. So I would often like go to the campus center and get coffee. And also I was on a limited budget. So instead of buying a sandwich, I would I went to UMass Amherst and they had huge chocolate chip cookies. The coffee was awful, but the combination of the cookie with the coffee was very good. So I kind of became addicted to the chocolate cookies. And I started drinking coffee often just to stay awake at night. And I had other friends that took other things to stay awake, but I decided to stick to caffeine. And so throughout college, I became, pretty serious, steady coffee drinker. And the campus center had horrible coffee, but they had one of those machines that was available 24/7, or the library, there was a coffee machine. So sometimes you pulled all night to drink coffee. When I first started working, I learned that people congregate around the coffee machines. And even though you're paid to like sit at your desk from 9 to 5, like you would always get up and hear people sitting and talking and schmoozing with each other. And my first job was with this company called Emhart Corporation. It was a Fortune 500 manufacturing company, and I was an auditor for them. And it was like the boys network. The guys would just stand around the coffee machine talking about the football game or dates they had the night before. But it just became like a real like social thing. So I would walk by, listen to them, and then go back to my desk because I wasn't really into the old boys club. But I just started learning that was like a place where people kind of met to talk about, have conversations. So I stayed with this company for about a year. I was on the audit team and it was a very chauvinistic, horrible company. I talked a bit about it in my book, but my manager had an affair with somebody in the office, and it was just like a lot of like old boys like stuff that I wasn't comfortable with. So I ended up moving, this was in Hartford, Connecticut, so I ended up moving to New York and working for another auditing position with Dun& Bradstreet Corporation. And this was a company that had a team of equal men and equal women. It was just like a really fun place to go on audits, and I traveled internationally, Europe. I'm gonna read you one story from one of my travels.
I worked for them.
For Emily? No, for Dun & Bradstreet or Emily?
For Dun & Bradstreet.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I traveled abroad.
Well, that's neat. I'll talk to you about that afterwards. So I'm gonna find one, I'm just trying to find. Okay, so one of my first assignments at Dun & Bradstreet was to go to London to the UK office to do an audit. And this is gonna be the section. On my first Dun & Bradstreet assignment, I met a woman in the UK who became a good friend during the 6 weeks I spent in London. Although she typically drank tea, knowing I was American, she offered me a cup of coffee at our first meeting. At this encounter, she shared her insights on London from a local perspective, including advice on places to safely take a morning run, where to shop, and other things one would not know as a tourist. For example, she suggested I visit the Marks and Spencer store in the early morning to buy clothing basics and underwear. At the time, they sold apparel that was made well and reasonably priced. She said this was where she shopped. The timing of my visit was soon after the royal wedding of Lady Diana Spencer and Prince Charles. Coincidentally, Lady Diana was part of the Marks and Spencer family. During my visit, I was introduced to the British way of drinking tea with a drop of milk. The coffee in the UK wasn't great, and I ended up drinking primarily tea during this visit. However, drinking tea with my new friends enforced the value of talking as a means of building rapport and establishing a longer-term relationship. As a departure gift from the London visit, my friend gave me a beer stein with gold trim and the insignia of the royal wedding. To this day, I attribute our friendship to the initial cup of coffee we shared. So my dad was a manufacturer's rep for several consumer electronic products. And as a little girl, I would go with him on the road. And this is kind of, I don't know if this is jumping ahead, but I just still kind of.
It's, before you get into your story with your dad. So you're learning through your work experiences now that connection with the coffee, it leads you to connections to people. So that would lead to possibly expanding networking through drinking coffee together. Can you expand on that idea of networking by having coffee together?
Yes, and I want to just go back, because I was sort of jumping ahead, I guess, when I was a little girl, I would travel with my dad, he was a manufacturer's rep, and his territory was all of New England, so I would go with him to Gloucester and up to New Hampshire or Vermont, and all his stores were like the little consumer electronics stores, like the mom and pop little radio and TV stores that we don't really have anymore. But he would go in and he would spend a half hour talking and telling jokes and like stuff that wasn't relevant to his business. And I would be sitting there listening like, okay, Dad. But I realized that he was then after the half hour, so he would get into what his business purpose was. And the person would buy and he would hit his quotas and he just like, because people, and I learned, like looking back, that he built trust with these people by talking to them first and just they listened to what his advice was, what the best products would be, and it was like a trust building relationship. And so I kind of incorporated that into my lifestyle when I started working with companies, because I realized people hate auditors. People absolutely hate auditors. And you walk into an office and they'll look at you like, what do you want? Like, and they'll give you the least amount of information they could because they're always on guard. But I learned like through my experience in London and subsequently in other audits that if I had coffee with the person and got to know them first, they built some trust and then they would start to want to help me and share things with me. And it'll become like mutually beneficial for both of us. So that was how I started learning about networking. Then I worked, so I traveled for a while, then I want to see if I'm coming back. So what, I was traveling for a while and then I came back to I was living in New York and then I just started getting messages this is something not as necessary in the book, but I started getting messages on my phone that so-and-so's getting married, or my friend in Boston was doing this and that, and I started really missing the Boston area. And then unfortunately, my grandmother also had breast cancer, and I decided to move back from Boston, from New York to Boston, because I really wanted to be closer to the family. And then around that time, this was around 1984, I ended up getting married to Bruce and still working in the corporate world and using some of my coffee techniques. But I got laid off. Fast forward a couple of years later, I started to network with some friends, and I got in a baby play group, and our social action ended up revolving around going to this place called the Coffee Connection, which used to be the Starbucks before Starbucks in the Boston area. So we're gonna go on to Lori's next question. And then I'll talk.
Right, so when did your passion about coffee turn into the Starbucks scene in particular?
Good question. Thank you for asking. All right, now I'm gonna read a section from my book. I got late, so I was working, when I had my son, I ended up working for a subsidiary of them, Branson, Massachusetts, called McCormick and Dodge. It was a mainframe software company in Natick. And I was a finance manager for 3 years, then had my son and was thinking, do I really want to go back to work full time or not? And then my manager offered me a part-time job, for me a part-time role as a project manager, and I did that for 2 years, and the company ended up merging with another company in Atlanta. And we had the choice of either moving to Atlanta or going through career counseling to help find a new job. So after being laid off from my job at McCormick and Dodge, I had ample free time. I was also fortunate to receive a great severance package, which gave me the opportunity to decide what to do next while still collecting a paycheck. Part of my severance included the chance to work as with a career counselor to help figure out my next step. I was offered 2 career tracks. 1, to find a similar position with another company, or 2, to start my own business as a consultant. My friend Joan had also been laid off, and we would regularly set up play dates with our young sons. We often met in Newton Center and would walk to the Starbucks. Well, we would often walk to Coffee Connection and get takeout cups of coffee and head to the playground. It was a great time to share ideas of what our next job roles would be. Joan also had a severance package and was interviewing several companies. The play dates became a routine thing, and my addiction to good coffee was firmly established. Recalling my dad's advice about being my own boss, coupled with the idea of wanting more flexible time with a young child, I opted to try to start my own business as a consultant. I put together my resume and was advised to conduct informal informational interviews with companies to find my niche. The career counselor encouraged me to arrange network meetings with other contacts I had met, as well as business leaders, to figure out my future path. Meeting people for coffee was a good way to conduct market research, and I found myself making many new coffee connections. I also attended many networking events through the BU Alumni Association. During one of these events, I met a man who had just invested in a brand new company called Starbucks. He said they were a growing company from the West Coast. They had charged $1 for a cup of coffee that cost them less than 10 cents to make. He thought it was a great investment and predicted that we would be hearing a lot about Starbucks in the future. This was around 1990. So fast forward, I had my next daughter, I had 2 other children, and sometime my youngest was born in 1995. I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit. Somewhere late 93 or 94, I can't remember, I heard that Starbucks was coming to Massachusetts. And they were taking over the Coffee Connection shops in Wellesley and Newton Center. I remembered my previous conversation at the networking event and was eager to check out Starbucks. I soon visited the Newton location while seeing my parents. Perhaps it was the intrigue of the investor combined with the lure of romanticism that drew me to Starbucks. I had read a few novels during my layoff period and learned how aspiring authors spent much of their time in cafes to network while writing books. I also learned that cafe culture was a thing for Jews in Europe, so maybe it was in my genes to become a coffee connoisseur. I quickly became obsessed with Starbucks. Okay.
Yes, very good, yeah, and Starbucks is still here to stay.
It is.
So with all that, can you think of any good coffee stories.
Yeah.
Have you met people that you never thought you would
Mhm.
meet, or have experiences that you never thought you would have over a cup of coffee?
Okay, yes, so I want to just tell my favorite, or my best coffee connection story, which kind of made me think about writing a book, was getting my dog. I was meeting a friend for coffee, and it was when we both had been, between jobs, and we were meeting in Wellesley Starbucks, and my oldest son hated dogs, he was a freshman in college. And my two daughters always wanted a dog, so I was just looking through the paper, and my friend texted that he was gonna be late. Actually, 15 years ago, did we text? I don't remember if we texted or he called and said he was gonna be late, I forget, but, I had the Boston Globe in front of me, and I was like, you know what, he's late, I'm just gonna look through the dog section and see if there's any dogs, like, for sale, and then we had wanted a Havanese dog, and I saw an ad, Havanese puppies for sale. So I called the gentleman. And we went over that night to see him, pouring rain, and we met my dog, this little Havanese puppy, who was 6 weeks old at the time, just came, he got all the dogs in the room with us. And it just, like, she just smelled us out and was like, kept coming over to us and was really curious, and we said, we're gonna take that dog home with us. And that's how, and I always think, like, if I hadn't been late for coffee, I mean, if my friend wasn't late for coffee, would I have my dog now? And she's 15 and a half, she'll be 16 in June, she's my best little friend. So I always attribute her to Starbucks. And she loves Starbucks, so whenever I am home, I'll take her either to Starbucks. I used to take her to the ones near me in Newton, but now I take her to the Matthew Commons one, and she'll actually pull me over because she knows I'll give her a cup of water. And she knows the direction, so it's really cute.
Yeah.
But that's probably my favorite story.
Yeah.
The other, I think just, especially, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of myself, but since moving to the Cape and joining Cape Cod Female Friends, I've been, it's like been the best way to meet people. I know through Warren's coffees, and then I've been doing coffees, like people just love to come to these coffees, and you meet people, and you network, and it's like a very easy, informal way to just meet somebody and then decide you want to meet the person again for like a longer meeting and just go lunch or whatever, or to do another event, but just like me, that initial coffee has been like great. I've made so many good friends that way, since I've lived on the Cape. Another good friend of mine, I had changed my profile next door, and wrote that I wrote a book and that I love coffee, so another friend of mine who read my thing next door and said, you sound really interesting, I'd love to meet you. So I met her at Amy's Coffee, whatever, however you pronounce it, and she's one of my closest friends now also. So it just shows like, it's been just a really good way to meet people.
So would you say that that is one of your biggest takeaways from the writing of your book and your continued passion with coffee? Is not just a way of staying friends with people from your past, but also kind of a way to make connections with new people as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just think that people are nervous to meet other people, and I haven't tried this on a dating app yet. Maybe I've started Coffee Connection dating app. Maybe that's my next venture. I don't know. But I think that just people are afraid to commit to spending long periods of time with people until they really know them. And I think having a cup of coffee is such a minimal investment. It's like $2 or $3 to get a cup of coffee. And if you don't like the person, you never have to see them again. But if you like them, you keep it. If you're at Starbucks, you get free refills if you're so I think it's just like a really low point of entry to find ways to meet people. So I found it really helpful to me.
So perhaps at this time, if you wanted to take questions from the your audience, or if there's any other relatable stories about your connection with coffee. How many of you actually drink coffee and depend on it and have a passion for it? Maybe not as passionate as Wendy was. She was inspired to write a book, but rely on that cup of coffee first thing in the morning. Yeah.